I want to talk to you about how Suncorp treat their staff in terms of salaries. Some firms invest in their staff, treat them with dignity and fairness, and reward their contributions, because they realize this a great way to have a high-quality, motivated workforce. This is the sort of firm most people would like to work at, and this is why such firms usually have low staff turnover. Suncorp is not such a business. Suncorp has a very high staff turnover, they're always hiring. This is because they try to bring staff in on inappropriate salaries and then screw them over at performance reviews until they go somewhere else. Let me tell you about my experience working at Suncorp, which I believe is quite common. When I joined Suncorp, I came from a mathematics and coding background. I hadn't worked in finance before, so I couldn't really gauge the exact nature of the role or whether there might be a learning curve. The amount seemed low, but the HR representative assured me that performance reviews were only 6 months away where I could renegotiate my salary. As we will see, this turned out to be a lie. I guess I assumed that no firm would be stupid enough to bring people in on salaries that weren't appropriate, because that would soon destroy productivity and create a huge amount of ill will that ultimately harms the business. Unfortunately, Suncorp management really are that short-sighted, greedy, and stupid. It soon became apparent that I had been hired into the most complex financial modeling role in the entire bank, on a salary that was below the middle on their pay scale, and one of the lowest on the floor. And furthermore, there was absolutely no learning curve, as I learned the role in 2 weeks where my predecessor took 4 months, and I was soon running rings around the management at Suncorp. Nonetheless, I did a great job in the role until we reached the 6-month mark, where I obviously expected that my salary would be adjusted to something appropriate as promised. However, when I made this request of the executive manager, it was swiftly denied. The claim that performance reviews were only 6 months away turned out to be a lie, as I had in fact joined right after the completion of the previous performance review process. When performance reviews finally did eventuate after working for 12 months on a completely inappropriate salary for that role, I noticed my manager was very keen that I state that I was only meeting expectations rather than exceeding expectations on my self-evaluation. Now, my manager was a good guy, so these were obviously instructions that came from above. Apparently managers are pressured by senior management to not say anyone is exceeding, because they might then be able to argue that they deserve a pay increase. At the completion of the performance review, I was given absolutely no pay increase whatsoever, despite having performed phenomenally as a risk modeler, completing work extremely quickly, finding countless errors in the bank's risk models, and despite my pay being completely inappropriate for that role and well below the market. My manager was so disgusted that he used the meeting for discussing my performance review to advise me that my salary was low, well below what I was worth, and that I should look for a job elsewhere. I soon decided to raise with my manager's manager that my salary was not appropriate. "We can't consider salaries until the next performance review," he said. Now I had already worked for 12 months on a completely inappropriate salary, so obviously there was no fucking way I was going to wait another year. I soon took this issue over his head to the next manager up, the executive manager. He claimed to be busy and it was many weeks until he met with me. At the meeting, I pointed out that my salary was far below what other people at Suncorp were earning in similar roles. They came in when we needed someone. "We can't bring their salaries down, and we're trying to cut costs," he said. I pointed out that my salary was tens of thousands of dollars below the market. "Maybe we can find someone on pay band 3, he announced, a pay band even lower than mine. I pointed out that I had reduced the runtime of one of the bank's models from 5.5 hours to 30 minutes, dramatically improving our productivity. He shrugged his shoulders. "The bank has to determine how much it's willing to pay for your skills and abilities," he said dismissively. He suggested I work really hard and ask for extra work, and maybe I would get an increase one day in the future. I inquired as to why I should do that, seeing as how my salary was tens of thousands of dollars below the market. He said snidely, "Well, that's not how I've approached my career." He did say he would have HR conduct a review of my salary, because HR maintain industry data about appropriate salaries for different roles, and get back to me soon. 6 weeks later, I still hadn't heard from him, so I raised the issue with him again. He admitted that he hadn't bothered to undertake a review. He claimed he had discussed my situation with the CFO, and she had advised him not to go through the process. The bank was refusing to conduct such a review, because it was in cost-cutting mode. I knew this was bullshit because the bank had recently hired several new staff. In my opinion, your salary is appropriate, he declared, after refusing to take any steps to determine whether my salary was appropriate. Then he said, the bank has no appetite for an increase at this time. I realize this isn't going to be satisfactory to you, and if that's the case, you should consider other options. When you apply for a job at Suncorp, their standard procedure is simply to offer you as little as possible, regardless of whether it is remotely appropriate for the role you'll be doing. Management at Suncorp display zero loyalty to their staff and have zero interest in investing in them or developing their careers. If you do ever end up working there, don't show them any loyalty, because they will show you absolutely none. What had happened between then and when I joined was that regulatory changes had come in, which meant that my particular modeling role was not high on the agenda of management anymore. Of course, they knew on the day they hired me that these regulatory changes were going to come in. So no doubt it was their plan to discard me all along. They could have simply moved me into another role. There were a lot of modeling roles in the bank, and in fact several people in management positions there who had the same background as I did. But then they would have had to give me a pay increase. Why pay me more when they didn't feel they had any immediate need to? I asked the executive manager whether I could be moved into another role. He said that if a role became available and was advertised on the internet I could apply for it, but he refused to take any proactive action whatsoever. What was also amusing about this situation was that, because management didn't have much political interest in my role anymore, he tried to claim that my low salary was justified because it wasn't a full-time job anymore. Yet apparently if I wanted an increase, I had to work really hard for another year. How could they possibly have it both ways? This is an extraordinary example of how greed, and lack of basic intelligence and integrity, created an impossible stalemate that could never be resolved. Fortunately, it wasn't too long before I moved to a bank in Sydney with a massive accompanying pay increase. Now, I'm a person of integrity. I can't imagine bringing someone in on a salary that was not appropriate for the role, having them work for 1 year, and then saying, "Ha ha ha, we don't need that role anymore, so go fuck yourself." I just can't imagine having the nerve to treat staff like that. I'm guessing most of you watching this video don't want to be treated like that either, so please, don't take a job at Suncorp. Perhaps you have arrived at my channel because you are thinking of taking a job at Suncorp. What would I say to someone considering a career at Suncorp? I would give them the same advice that Suncorp's own management gave me: you should consider other options. Take the bank's own advice, consider other options.